In the wild, no weapon or wall guarantees safety. From a DIY .50 caliber rifle dropping a 2,000 pound polar bear in Svalbard to a luxury boar hunt gone wrong in Spain, from a Russian grizzly slaughter inside a cabin to a Kodiak charging a fishing village, and from a moose triggering an avalanche in the Rockies to a black bear ambush on a foggy riverbank, these true encounters prove that survival depends on precision, instinct, and sheer luck. Watch till the end. These stories will leave you stunned. On March 12, 2025, the frozen coast of Svalbard stretched out in endless white silence, broken only by the sharp wind that cut across the sea ice. Anders Lindholm, a 40-year-old hunter from northern Sweden, had come to this remote edge of the Arctic to test the weapon he had spent months building with his own hands. His life had long been tied to the wilderness. From a young age, he studied the craft of woodwork, the balance of steel, and the precision of cartridges. He had always dreamed of designing a firearm capable of handling the most dangerous animals on Earth. After years of planning, that dream became real in the form of a custom .50 caliber rifle. Every piece had been chosen with purpose. He had used a reinforced stainless steel barrel, hand-lapped a match-grade chamber, and shaped a laminated birch stock designed to absorb the punishing recoil. The trigger was tuned to 3 pounds, light but steady, meant for cold hands wrapped in heavy gloves. Anders even measured and loaded every round himself, choosing the right powder and bullet weight to cut through thick hide and bone. The rifle had become more than a tool. It was the heart of his work and proof of his patience. The Arctic offered him both test and trial. That March day, he moved carefully across the flat expanse, boots sinking into wind-blown drifts. The sky was dim with mist and ice ridges jutted like frozen walls around him. He carried the weapon slung across his chest, ready for any shadow that might rise from the snow. Near him lay the faint signs of seals, their scent clinging to the air. For predators, such trails were invitations. As he stepped forward, his boot pressed on a patch of ice that rang hollow beneath his weight. Below it lay a hidden crevasse, a trap ready to open. Before he could pull back, movement flared from behind a ridge. A colossal polar bear, nearly 2,000 pounds, surged forward, drawn by the scent of a fresh seal carcass. Its body cut through the snow with terrifying speed, claws scraping against ice, head low and jaws wide. Anders raised the heavy rifle and fired. The first round struck behind the massive shoulder, the recoil jolting through his chest. The impact staggered the beast but did not bring it down. It lunged closer, claws tearing at the ice, swiping within inches of his legs. He stumbled, sliding toward the edge of the weak patch of ice, the ground creaking under him. His breath came in short bursts as the animal pressed forward, its eyes fixed with deadly focus. The hunter steadied himself, forcing calm into his shaking arms. He squeezed again. The bullet slammed into the spine, slowing the beast but failing to end it. Snow sprayed upward as the predator lunged once more. With a final effort, Anders fired into the chest. The giant collapsed, crashing against the frozen ground, its weight sending waves of snow rolling. Anders stood trembling, breathless, alive only by a margin as thin as the ice beneath his boots. The snow settled in silence around the massive body, the air filled only with the faint hiss of wind over the ridges. Anders stood unmoving, his arms locked around the rifle, his chest heaving with each breath. The polar bear lay stretched across the ice, its enormous frame still, eyes glazed, the white fur stained by deep crimson. The ground where it fell was carved with claw marks and churned snow, a violent reminder of how close the fight had been. The hunter's body began to register the cost. His legs shook, and his arm throbbed where the swipe had torn through his jacket and grazed his skin. His knees buckled, and he fell against the frozen surface, pressing his palm into the icy crust to keep himself steady. The cold bit deeper, sharp against sweat-soaked clothes, yet he felt almost detached, his mind turning again and again to the sight of the bear rushing at him, jaws wide, the earth itself trembling with its charge. As minutes passed, the adrenaline drained away, replaced by a heavy weight of exhaustion. He forced himself to crawl closer, staring at the animal that had nearly ended him. Its size seemed even greater now in stillness, the paws broad as dinner plates, the teeth curved like blades. The rifle had worked as he had intended, each part performing in unison, yet it was clear that survival had not rested on the weapon alone. Timing, luck, and sheer will had all played their part in those frantic seconds. Anders slowly gathered what strength he had left and pushed himself upright. He checked the ice beneath him, the thin patch still groaning under pressure, the hidden crevasse waiting silently. One more step in the wrong place would have sent him plunging into the darkness below where no bullet could have saved him. He stepped back carefully, marking each movement until he was certain the ground was solid. He glanced once more at the fallen predator, knowing the story of the encounter would spread quickly through the small Arctic communities. Few would ever face a 2,000-pound bear and live to tell of it. Yet in his heart there was no sense of triumph, only the raw truth that nature remained the greater force. His weapon had proven strong, but the wilderness had nearly swallowed him alongside the beast. The long trek back to camp was slow and grueling. His muscles ached, his wounds stiffened, and the cold gnawed with every gust of wind. Each step left deep prints in the snow, weaving a trail that told the story of struggle and survival. When he finally reached his shelter, he collapsed by the stove, wrapping his arm with strips of cloth torn from spare garments. Pain pulsed through him, but he forced himself to breathe steadily, grateful for the small fire that pushed back the Arctic chill. In the days that followed, officials examined the site, noting how hunger and shifting ice had driven the bear inland. Reports warned again that collapsing sea platforms were pushing predators into human paths. Anders became an example in those warnings, his scars a living reminder that even the most prepared can be tested to the edge. His creation had saved him, but the encounter proved that survival in the north would always demand more than steel and powder. On October 17, 2022, the rolling hills of Castilla-La Mancha were painted in autumn colors, where golden leaves drifted across private estates known for their exclusivity and grandeur. Alejandro Vargas, a 40-year-old businessman from Madrid, had chosen this remote region not only for the hunt but also for the prestige attached to it. His life had been shaped by success and refinement, his passion for hunting grown from childhood trips with his grandfather. Over the years, he had turned it into a luxury pursuit, traveling across Europe and Africa to chase trophies. This outing was meant to be another jewel in his collection, polished by the comfort of guides, modern equipment, and catered meals that promised both safety and satisfaction. Alejandro carried with him a bespoke .375 H&H Magnum, custom-built with elegant wood and sleek steel, as much a statement of wealth as a weapon. His designer camouflage blended with the thickets, though it had been chosen as much for appearance as for use. For him, this event was a perfect balance of control and nature, where animals were tracked but rarely allowed to tip the scale of danger. He believed the environment would bend to the systems and structures set up by the estate, as countless hunters before him had thought. The morning was quiet except for the faint rustle of reeds swaying near the edge of swampy ground. Mist rolled across the open clearings, making the manicured trails seem eerie and uncertain. Alejandro walked ahead of his guide, his boots pressing into soft earth, the rifle balanced and ready. He expected the hunt to play out like many before, with careful positioning, a steady aim, and a clean shot to end it swiftly. But nature had its own plan. From the dense reeds, a massive tusker burst forth, its bulk well over 300 pounds. The wild boar tore through the fog like a force of nature, its tusks gleaming, eyes burning with aggression. Alejandro's pulse surged as he raised his weapon, the mist clinging to his vision. He fired, the shot ringing across the marshland, but the round struck at an angle, glancing off the thick shoulder hide. The boar did not stop. With a roar of breath and mud flying under its hooves, the beast collided with him. Alejandro was hurled backward onto a muddy bank, his rifle falling from his hands. Pain ripped through his thigh as sharp tusks cut muscle, while another slash tore into his forearm, leaving deep wounds. He tried to push himself away, his designer gear shredded and soaked in muck, but the boar pressed forward, relentless. The guide rushed to intervene, firing a quick shot that grazed the neck of the beast. For a moment it faltered, blood streaking the mist. But instead of falling, it spun violently, turning back on Alejandro with renewed fury. The tusks struck across his chest, cutting deep, knocking the air from his lungs, leaving him sprawled and gasping as the predator slammed into an ATV parked nearby. The sound of crushing metal filled the air as the hunt spiraled into chaos. The twisted frame of the ATV groaned under the weight of the boar as it thrashed, snapping branches and scattering supplies across the clearing. Guides scrambled to regain control, their boots sliding in mud as they raised rifles with shaking hands. Each second stretched into eternity as the animal raged, its tusks tearing at steel and dirt, while Alejandro lay only a few feet away, chest heaving, blood soaking into the marsh. The smell of iron mixed with swamp air, a heavy reminder of how close life and death balanced in that moment. One of the guides steadied himself and fired again. The shot struck deeper this time, cutting through the thick hide and driving the boar into a stumbling turn. Another round followed, echoing sharply against the mist, tearing through the shoulder. The tusker spun in violent circles, mud and water spraying in wide arcs as it tried to charge once more, but faltered under the impact of multiple wounds. At last, its body shuddered, legs gave out, and the beast collapsed near the shattered ATV, its breath rattling before silence settled over the swamp. The quiet that followed was almost unreal. For a moment, only the dripping of water from reeds and the distant call of a bird carried through the fog. The once controlled, luxurious hunt had dissolved into a battlefield strewn with broken gear, ruined vehicles, and crimson-stained mud. Alejandro struggled to push himself upright, every breath searing his chest. His designer camouflage hung in tatters, the sharp cuts on his thigh and arm leaving trails of red down to the muck. Guides rushed to his side, lifting him carefully, their hands trembling as they realized the depth of the wounds. They wrapped makeshift bandages from torn clothing and dragged him toward an all-terrain vehicle that had not been destroyed. Each movement drew a groan from Alejandro, his face pale, his body weakened. The journey back to the estate felt endless. Tires churned through mud while the mist swallowed their tracks behind them, erasing signs of the chaos that had taken place. By the time they reached the lodge, Alejandro's pulse had slowed, his breath ragged. Medics on site rushed to stabilize him before calling for emergency evacuation. As news spread, whispers grew louder across the hunting community. What had begun as a lavish event meant to highlight wealth and control had ended as a warning. Luxury rifles, prepared guides, and gourmet camps could not strip the raw unpredictability from nature. The estate owners faced questions about safety, while officials reminded all hunters that wild boars, with their sharp tusks and stubborn resilience, had been claiming lives for centuries across Europe. Alejandro would carry the scars for the rest of his life. His chest bore deep marks where the tusk had cut through. His thigh ached with each step, and his arm had lost much of its strength. The trophies he once displayed with pride seemed hollow after the night in Castilla-La Mancha. Each scar told him the same lesson: nature never bows to comfort or control. The encounter proved that even in the heart of privilege, the wild could break through without warning and remind man of his place. On July 12, 2021, a small group of 5 hunters from Khabarovsk made their way deep into the Ussuri taiga, following a winding tributary of the Kutu River. The thick forest was known for its heavy rainfall, steep ridges, and presence of some of the largest bears in the Russian Far East. For weeks, locals had spoken of a massive grizzly that raided salmon streams and tore through small camps, a predator weighing close to 900 pounds. The men wanted to track it down, armed with SKS carbines and a .375 H&H Magnum, prepared for what they thought would be a dangerous but controlled hunt. The leader of the group, Yuri, was a seasoned hunter in his 40s, tall and quiet, with decades of experience in the taiga. Alongside him was Pavel, younger and eager, carrying one of the carbines. Sergei, older and careful, had joined to help with supplies and tracking. The other two, Mikhail and Andrei, were both strong woodsmen, used to harsh conditions and heavy loads. Together they built a small log cabin near the riverbank, stacking firewood neatly outside, storing venison and dried fish inside for the nights ahead. Their plan was to rest during stormy weather and resume searching once the skies cleared. That evening, rain fell hard on the roof, drumming against the logs, while smoke from the stove curled through the small room. They cooked a meal of venison and potatoes, the rich smell filling the air. Wet clothes hung drying by the fire, rifles leaned against the walls, and muddy boots rested near the doorway. Laughter broke through the storm as they shared food and stories, secure in the thought that the cabin gave them safety against the harshness of the wild. By midnight, the forest outside was drowned in darkness, rain hammering the roof in unbroken rhythm. The men slept close to each other on wooden bunks, their gear tucked away, unaware of the danger creeping closer. The scent of meat drifted from the cabin into the trees, carried by the storm. In the distance, a heavy shape moved among the shadows, following the smell with growing hunger. At 2:47 a.m., the cabin shuddered. A massive body slammed against the wooden door, rattling the hinges. The men jolted awake as wood splintered and glass cracked. Another blow followed, harder, until the door cracked wide. In that instant, chaos erupted. A massive grizzly surged through the gap, its claws sweeping through the tight space. Yuri barely had time to reach for his weapon before the bear's paw struck, crushing him against the wall. Mikhail and Sergei were next, thrown into broken planks, their cries drowned by the roar. Blood smeared across the wooden floor as the predator pressed forward, unstoppable in the cramped room. Pavel and Andrei dove under the shattered table, bracing against the heavy stove, hearts racing as the cabin turned into a battlefield. Gunfire rang out, bullets striking the thick hide, but the beast raged on, the storm outside mixing with screams inside, tearing the night into terror. The beast thrashed inside the broken cabin, wood snapping beneath its weight as the storm outside raged louder. The two men hidden beneath the shattered table clutched their rifles, trying to fire upward through the legs of the furniture, the muzzle flashes lighting the ruined room for brief moments. Bullets struck, some tearing fur, others thudding into the logs, but the animal pressed forward with unrelenting force. The stove shifted under the impact, hot embers scattering across the floorboards, filling the air with sparks and smoke. The bear swiped again, ripping at anything in reach, its roars shaking the walls. The bodies of their companions lay crushed, silent in the corner, while blood pooled around them and mixed with the rainwater streaming through the gaps in the roof. Every second felt endless as the men fought to survive in the cramped chaos. The predator slammed its weight against the overturned table, driving it closer to the stove, nearly pinning the two hunters who pressed their backs against the hot iron. At last, one shot landed deep, cutting into muscle. The grizzly staggered, bellowing with rage, its great bulk smashing against the doorway. For a few moments, it seemed the structure itself might collapse as beams cracked above. Then, as quickly as it had entered, the massive creature turned, crashing through the splintered opening into the storm beyond. Its heavy footfalls faded into the trees, leaving behind silence broken only by the sound of rain and the crackle of burning embers. The two survivors crawled out from under the wreckage, gasping in shock. Their faces were pale, hands trembling as they looked around the cabin that had become a tomb. Three of their companions lay motionless, their bodies broken by the force of the attack. The survivors dragged themselves to the wall, sliding down in exhaustion, their breaths ragged as they listened for any sign that the beast might return. The hours that followed were long and agonizing. The fire smoldered in the stove, filling the cabin with smoke. Rainwater leaked through the holes in the roof, soaking blankets and pooling on the floor. The two men sat together, gripping their weapons, their eyes fixed on the doorway where the logs had been torn apart. Every rustle of branches outside made their hearts pound harder. By dawn, gray light filtered through the shattered windows. The storm had passed, but the destruction remained. The cabin stood half ruined, one wall crushed, the door barely hanging on its hinges. The men gathered what strength they could to push the fallen beams aside, stepping out into the wet clearing. The forest was silent, heavy with mist, as though nothing had happened. Yet the trail of blood and broken wood told a different story, one of violence and fear that would not soon be forgotten. When rescuers arrived hours later, they found the two survivors weak and trembling, unable to speak at first. Their companions were laid to rest in the clearing, while officials surveyed the wreckage with grim faces. The incident spread quickly, serving as a chilling reminder that even within the walls of a cabin, no hunter in the Ussuri taiga was beyond reach. Nature had shown its power once more, proving that human walls could not always hold against the strength of a predator born in the wild. On August 3, 2025, the people of a small fishing village on Kodiak Island began their morning as they always had, with nets cast out at dawn and crates stacked high with fresh salmon by the docks. The village had stood for generations against storms and long winters, its families relying on the sea and the rivers that cut through the forest. Among them lived Mark Jensen, a man known not only as a skilled fisherman but also as a steady hunter. He had grown up on the island, raised by a father who taught him how to track game and respect the wild creatures that roamed the land. By his mid-40s, Mark had faced countless storms and challenges, but his calm nature and sharp aim had earned him trust from his neighbors. That summer had been unusually harsh. Salmon runs were weaker than normal, leaving the rivers emptier and the larger predators hungrier. Bears often wandered close to villages when food was scarce, but most avoided humans if frightened off quickly. Still, everyone knew that when a bear grew desperate, no fence or wooden wall was enough to stop it. On that August day, the first signs of trouble came when goats bleated wildly at the edge of the village. A heavy crash followed, then the sound of barrels tumbling down. When the fishermen turned their heads, they saw it. A massive Kodiak bear, easily weighing more than 1,200 pounds, its coat dark and matted from weeks of struggling for food. It dragged its claws across the ground, overturning barrels filled with fish scraps, sending crates toppling into the mud and scattering supplies across the dockside. Panic spread quickly. Families pulled children indoors, doors slammed, and fishermen abandoned their work as the animal moved closer to the docks. Nets were ripped apart, small boats rocked against their ropes, and chickens scattered as the ground shook with each step. The bear's growls cut through the air, louder than the cries of the gulls circling above. Inside his home, Mark took down his .375 H&H Magnum, a rifle built for power but handled only with careful precision. Stepping outside, he advanced slowly, boots pressing into the damp earth. The rain-soaked air smelled of fish and salt, mixed now with the sharp musk of the predator. His eyes followed the beast as it towered near the dock, massive paws crushing crates as though they were kindling. Mark raised his rifle skyward and fired a warning shot. The sound echoed across the bay, startling the gulls into flight. The bear paused for only a second before slamming its weight into a small boat tied to the dock. Wood cracked, boards splintered, and the vessel tipped halfway into the water. The predator's eyes locked forward, its head swinging as it prepared to push deeper into the heart of the village. Mark steadied his breath, adjusted his stance, and lowered his sights toward the heaving shoulder of the beast. He pulled the trigger, the sharp crack of the rifle splitting the air, and the round slammed into the animal's side. The round tore into the giant's frame, and for the first time, it faltered. Its front paw slipped on the wet planks of the dock, claws scraping wood as the shock of the impact slowed its charge. The monster let out a guttural roar that echoed across the inlet, seagulls lifting in frantic spirals overhead. For a moment it seemed as if it might push forward regardless of the wound, its mass shifting toward the clustered houses behind the shoreline. Mark kept his feet planted, the rifle firm against his shoulder, his eye locked on the moving target. The bear stomped again, smashing another crate of fish into pieces, scattering scales and bones across the dock. Then Mark squeezed off a second round, this one deliberately placed to push the animal back rather than finish it. The bullet struck with a deep thud, forcing the predator to stagger sideways into the shallow water at the dock's edge. Water splashed high, soaking the broken boat beside it, as the animal flailed against the sudden force. For tense moments it spun in circles, foam rising around its legs. The beast then clambered back up onto the shore, sides heaving, and turned its head toward the forest. Mark released 2 more careful shots into the earth near its massive paws, the sound and the vibration of dirt exploding serving as the final push. The bear growled but did not advance again. With one last glance at the village, it lumbered slowly toward the tree line, its breath ragged, its movement sluggish from exhaustion. Only when the hulking frame disappeared into the dense brush did silence fall. The smell of burned powder hung in the damp air, mingling with salt from the sea. The docks were littered with ruined crates, smashed barrels, and the remains of a boat half sunken in the shallows. Families slowly opened their doors, stepping out with cautious eyes, their expressions filled with relief. Children clung to their mothers, and fishermen gathered at the waterfront to survey the wreckage. Mark lowered his weapon at last, the weight of the barrel pulling downward as the tension drained from his arms. He scanned the tree line again, making sure the animal had gone. Only then did he allow himself to breathe fully, sweat mixing with the mist on his brow. His calm steps carried him back along the pier where the wood was cracked and splintered from the brute's power. The aftermath was less about what had been lost and more about what had been spared. No lives were taken. No blood spilled upon the village ground. The damage was scattered across tools, supplies, and wood, things that could be rebuilt and replaced. Word spread quickly through the clustered houses of how Mark had stood firm, how his steady hand had stopped the animal before it could push deeper into their homes. By midday, officials from the island arrived, noting tracks that led away into the forest. They explained that the attack was the result of hunger. The salmon runs were weaker than usual, forcing the bear to seek food where people lived. For the villagers, the memory would linger, a reminder that even in familiar places, the wild could appear without warning. Mark returned to his cabin later that evening, his rifle cleaned and stored, his body heavy with exhaustion. He knew that the creature might survive and wander again, but for that day the village stood unharmed. In the silence of the night, only the soft rhythm of the tide against the rocks remained, proof that calm could follow chaos, and that courage in the right moment could protect an entire community. On March 12, 2024, the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains stood covered in deep snow, their slopes gleaming under a pale winter sun. For seasoned hunter Eric Thompson, the mountains were not only familiar terrain, but also a place where he tested his patience and skill. Raised in Colorado, Eric had grown up with stories of hunters who faced both game and nature's fury, and by his mid-30s, he had built a reputation for calm precision in dangerous hunts. He carried a .300 Winchester Magnum, a rifle chosen for its power and accuracy, its weight balanced perfectly in his hands after years of practice. That morning, Eric had set out early, snowshoes crunching underfoot, breath turning to mist in the sharp cold. He followed the fresh tracks of a large bull moose, a creature known for its unpredictable temper. The signs were clear: churned snow, broken saplings, and steaming droppings. He moved carefully along a steep slope, the mountain groaning beneath layers of ice and powder. Every step carried the risk of setting loose a dangerous slide, yet his focus remained fixed on the massive figure moving slowly higher along the ridge. The moose was a giant, its dark coat standing stark against the white, antlers stretched wide, catching sunlight as it turned its head. Eric studied the animal through his scope, adjusting his stance on the uneven ground. The air was eerily quiet, save for the groan of shifting snowpack beneath hooves. He steadied his breathing, waiting for the right moment. Then, without warning, the beast bolted. With a surge of raw force, the bull charged downhill, antlers lowered, hooves pounding ice. Each strike sent tremors through the slope, snow breaking loose in sheets. The mountainside rumbled, and suddenly the ground itself seemed to collapse. A small avalanche tore free, carrying shards of ice, broken branches, and slabs of snow roaring past Eric. The hunter lost his footing, sliding nearly 20 feet, boots scraping against ice as his rifle stayed clutched tight in gloved hands. Cold bit into his fingers through torn fabric, and jagged shards sliced into his jacket as he fought to slow himself. All the while, the moose barreled closer, its fury unchecked. Eric scrambled, trying to plant his boots into a solid patch, but the slope gave little support. The bull's antlers grazed his leg as it thundered past, the impact numbing his thigh and nearly sending him tumbling further down the ridge. Desperation drove him to pull the trigger. Once, then again, shots ringing through the high valley. Both rounds grazed the animal's shoulder, tearing fur but not halting its momentum. The enraged beast stormed downward, snow flying in great sprays around it, hooves sparking against hidden rocks. Seconds stretched painfully long, every heartbeat filled with danger. Eric's chest heaved as he tried to track its path through drifting snow. Finally, the moose veered into a stand of lower trees, vanishing into the thicket, its heavy body cracking branches as it moved. Snow drifted back onto the slope, burying jagged stones and fallen wood, leaving the mountain scarred but silent once again. Eric braced himself against the slope, his chest heaving, knowing that one wrong move had nearly ended everything. The slope lay torn and scarred as Eric steadied himself against the cold earth. His rifle felt heavy in his hands, its metal chilled from the mountain air. The echoes of the avalanche still seemed to roll faintly through the valley, though the snow had settled. His thigh throbbed where the antlers had brushed, and every breath drew a sharp sting through his chest. He looked at the broken path ahead, scattered with chunks of ice and crushed saplings, each marking the violence of the moment. Eric forced himself to move carefully, boots sinking into fresh drifts as he searched for solid ground. The slope remained unstable, with cracks visible along ridges where more slides could break free. His focus turned inward, knowing the fight for survival was not over. One slip could send him tumbling into unseen rocks hidden below the snow. Each step became a measured choice, balancing strength with patience. He paused often, scanning the tree line where the moose had vanished. The animal's power was unmatched, and though wounded, it had not slowed. Its tracks cut deep into the snow, branches bent and broken in its wake. Eric knew better than to follow too closely. The beast was still capable of sudden violence, and the mountain itself was as much an enemy as the animal he had tracked. Hours passed, with the light shifting overhead, clouds gathering across the peaks. Eric pressed forward toward lower ground, driven more by the need for safety than by the hunt. His leg ached with each motion, blood staining the snow where the skin had been cut. He tightened his belt above the wound to slow the flow, gritting his teeth against the sting. By mid-afternoon, the air grew heavier, the sky darkening as more snow threatened to fall. Eric reached a cluster of firs that offered shelter from the wind. He rested there, leaning his rifle across his knees, his heartbeat slowing at last. He thought of how close the mountain had come to taking him, how thin the line had been between control and chaos. The memory of sliding helplessly down the slope returned with each gust of wind, the roar of the avalanche echoing in his mind. When evening came, Eric made his way slowly toward the valley floor. Villagers had often spoken of hunters who underestimated both animal and mountain, and now he understood their words in full. The moose remained out there, wild and unbroken, while he carried the scars of the encounter as proof of how unforgiving the land could be. Back at his camp, Eric tended to his wounds by firelight, his hands steady despite exhaustion. He cleaned the gashes, wrapped his leg, and set his rifle carefully beside him. The flames cast long shadows, and the silence of the night reminded him of how easily it all could have ended. By dawn, he resolved that survival in such places came not from force alone, but from respect. The mountain had shown its strength, the animal's fury, and he had lived through both. His hunt had turned into a battle of endurance, and though no trophy lay at his feet, the lesson of the avalanche zone would stay with him forever. On September 14, 2024, the cool mist of early autumn wrapped tightly around a narrow river cutting through the wild forests of British Columbia. Liam Parker, an experienced hunter and father of one, guided a small canoe quietly along the calm current. Years of hunting had made him disciplined and focused, and he was known in his community for his steady aim and sharp instincts. But this journey was different from most. This time, his 12-year-old son Ethan was by his side, learning what it meant to travel the wilderness with care and respect. Liam carried a .30 .06 rifle across his lap, always ready, while Ethan stayed low, wide-eyed at the expanse of trees and fog stretching in every direction. The river seemed calm, but the stillness carried a hidden weight. The banks were lined with thick brush, roots twisting into the dark water. Birds had fallen silent, and only the drip of moisture from branches broke the quiet. Liam kept his eyes on the shoreline, knowing well that rivers often attracted both prey and predators. The scent of fish hung in the damp air, a draw for any animal searching for food at the end of summer. Without warning, the silence split. A massive black bear burst from the undergrowth, its dark frame towering above the canoe. The sudden splash of water had startled it, and in an instant, instinct had taken over. The predator lunged, claws ripping through wood as the canoe rocked violently. Splinters and pieces of paddle were scattered across the current. Ethan froze, but Liam reacted with practiced speed. He shoved his son down beneath him, using his own body as a shield just as claws tore through the air. A heavy swipe raked across his left arm and shoulder, splitting flesh and shredding his jacket. Hot pain surged through him, but adrenaline kept his hands steady. Blood poured quickly, staining the wooden edge of the canoe, yet his focus sharpened to a single task: survival. Liam pulled the rifle to his shoulder and fired once into the air, the crack echoing through the trees. The bear recoiled but pressed forward again, circling the edge of the canoe. Liam gritted his teeth and fired 2 quick shots into its massive shoulder and chest. The impact staggered the beast, but it did not retreat. It growled, pacing the water's edge, muscles rippling beneath thick fur as it searched for another opening. The canoe rocked in the shifting current, water seeping over the edge as Liam steadied himself for another strike. The black bear circled along the bank, its breath heavy in the cool air, eyes fixed on the small canoe drifting in the shallows. Water slapped against the sides as Liam steadied his rifle again, ignoring the blood soaking his sleeve. His shoulder burned with every movement, but his mind stayed clear. He lined up the sights and fired once more, the shot hitting deep into the animal's chest. The beast staggered but still refused to fall. Its claws tore at the muddy ground, sending clumps of earth into the river as it growled in fury. The canoe rocked dangerously, and Liam pressed down on Ethan with one arm while holding firm with the other. He knew one mistake could tip them both into the current, where escape would be impossible. Gathering his last strength, he drew a careful breath and aimed again. The final shot struck the spine, and the giant dropped heavily, collapsing into the brush with a crash that sent birds scattering from the trees. Silence followed, broken only by the steady flow of the river. For a moment, Liam remained frozen, body trembling from loss of blood and the fading rush of adrenaline. Then he turned to his son, pulling him close with his good arm, relief mixing with pain as the danger finally ended. The bear's body lay still at the edge of the bank, its bulk half hidden by reeds and mist. The canoe drifted slowly, nudged by the current, and Liam forced it toward a shallow bend where he could push it onto gravel. He staggered out, boots sinking in wet sand, his arm hanging heavy and torn. Ethan followed, pale and shaken, clinging close as they moved away from the water's edge. Together they stumbled through the trees until they found a safe clearing where Liam could rest against a log. He bound his wounds as best he could, tearing strips of cloth from his shirt to wrap around his shoulder. Each breath was shallow, but the bleeding slowed. The boy fetched branches and tried to keep a small fire alive, its smoke curling upward into the gray sky. By morning, villagers arrived after hearing the distant shots. They found Liam pale but alive, Ethan close by, both shaken but safe. The bear's carcass still marked the riverbank, a reminder of how quickly a calm day could become a fight for survival.